What happens when goodbye isn't actually goodbye? Well, you get something like the Raiders' not last game in Oakland. This was undoubtedly one of the more emotional, confusing, and surreal sporting events I've ever had the privilege of attending.
And especially thank you for being the best fans in all of sports. We love you all. Good night, everyone.
I'm Cheyenne Hollis, this is the Touchback, and today I want to travel back to Christmas Eve of 2018 to remember when the Raiders played their last game in Oakland, only it wasn't actually their last game.
We don't know if we'll be here next year, and if not, I wanted to make sure I took the chance to say thank you to all of them.
Before we look at the game itself, it's important to go over the backstory that led up to that very specific moment in time. So, relocation plans for the Raiders to move from Oakland to Las Vegas had been approved in 2017, much to the chagrin of the team's Northern California fans who had a history of being jerked around by the Raiders.
I have mixed feelings, obviously. I love Oakland. I love the fans in Oakland.
However, Raiders owner Mark Davis had a few issues about the move. A new stadium in Las Vegas was not going to be ready until the 2020 season, while the team's lease with the Oakland Coliseum expired at the end of 2018. By the way, those who do not study history are doomed to repeat it. Anyway, all signs had pointed to the Raiders playing out that 2019 season in Oakland. That was until December of 2018 when the City of Oakland filed a federal antitrust lawsuit against the Raiders and the National Football League. Why did that matter? Team officials had actually previously gone on the record to expressly state that if the City of Oakland sued the team, it would not stay in town. For the City of Oakland, this was essentially the nuclear option. This just caused absolute chaos. Nobody had any idea of what was going on. It was just nothing but uncertainty and speculation and just a lot of chatter about what the hell was going to happen, because the Raiders had already stated that they weren't staying if the city sued the team, and the city sued the team. The timeline here is also important to keep track of. So the Oakland Raiders had a home game on December 9th. A few days later, that is when the city would file the lawsuit against the team, and all hell just sort of broke loose at this time. The team was on the road in week 15 going to Cincinnati. So not only was the week 16 Monday night showdown against the Denver Broncos the first time home fans had a chance to go to a game since news broke, it also shaped up to be the final game of the Raiders at the Oakland Coliseum. Heading into this game, there was really just absolutely no clarity on the situation. In fact, most of the talk had centered around Mark Davis trying to get the 49ers to share their stadium with him for a year. Again, does this not sound familiar? As it turns out, all of Davis's cockamamie schemes didn't really have a lot of traction to him. The Niners weren't interested. Reno wasn't feasible. Sam Boyd Stadium just wasn't going to work out. Eventually, he did cater into the city's demands, and the Raiders did play their final season in 2019. However, that was unknown as we headed into the home finale for the 2018 season, that Monday night showdown against the Denver Broncos. That brings us to a contest which many people attended with the idea that this could more than likely be the Raiders' final go-round in Oakland. The build-up to the not last Raiders game in Oakland, it was very weird feeling for a number of different reasons. For starters, Monday night games are always odd on the West Coast because you're starting an NFL game at 5:20 in essentially the late afternoon, early evening. In addition to that, it was of course Christmas Eve. So not only did you have a West Coast Monday night game, but it was on Christmas Eve, which obviously comes with its own feeling. I remember thinking before I even left Sacramento that this was like really random, just having a Christmas Eve NFL game and a Monday NFL game in Oakland. It didn't feel like anything else I had attended up till this point in my life. As for the weather, it had been pretty miserable all day long. Rainy, cloudy, bit windy. Things did eventually clear up, and when I made my way to the parking lot around like 3:45, 4 o'clock, it wasn't raining at all anymore, but it was still just gray, dreary, kind of perfect for the situation. In true Coliseum fashion, the rain meant that there was not a dry seat in the Coliseum, and nothing quite beats having a wet butt on a cold day. As I was walking through the parking lot and towards the stadium entrance of the Oakland Coliseum, you definitely got a sense the vibe was different. There were a lot of different emotions from everyone there. There was anger, there was defiance, there was passion, there's sadness, there's a lot of love from Raiders fans, and of course, it wouldn't be a Raiders home game in Oakland without the Raiders. I want to touch on the love aspect of this, by the way. Oakland never turned on the Raiders as a team. Their hatred, their anger, their displeasure, it was always directed at Mark Davis and Mark Davis alone. I'd argue that Raiders fans, for the most part, still want to see the team do well. Even though they're in Las Vegas, they want to see the Raiders win. That being said, they do not care for Mark Davis, and that is putting it very, very lightly. Their loyalty to the silver and black, their loyalty to the commitment to excellence is why 50,000 Raiders fans still turned up on a crappy, rainy day in Oakland to support a team that was abandoning them. If this was going to be the last Raiders game in Oakland, they were going to be there to cheer their team on and to support the franchise that they had loved. By comparison, just for the record, the Houston Oilers last game in Houston, only 15,000 people showed up. So for the Raiders to get 50,000, I think that says a lot about that fan base.
Oh man, Raider Nation is tough. They're gritty and they're loyal.
Once you got through security and scanned your ticket and all that, once you were inside the Oakland Coliseum, the mood definitely changed. As you were walking along the concourses, you came across a lot of people just exploring and taking it all in. There were people just going through the various stages of grief before the game, and everyone was sort of at a different level. You know, there was depression, there was sadness, there was anger. No one really knew how to felt this because they didn't have any time to prepare. Like I said, the Raiders leaving Oakland wasn't a possibility until about 12 days beforehand. Everyone thought that they would have one more season to say their goodbye, prepare their emotions, and all of that stuff. However, this looked like it was it, and people were just trying to figure out what they should do, how they should grieve. It was really just a totally surreal experience before kickoff as everyone tried to just soak in their last ever pregame at the Oakland Coliseum for football. After loitering around for a bit, I made my way up to the upper deck behind one of the end zones where I was going to be sitting on this occasion. Assigned seating when you're sitting behind an end zone in the upper deck at a Raiders game is not existent, so I just went for the seat that was least wet and didn't have anyone else around it. The game itself is mostly a blur to me. There are a few moments I remember quite well, but by and large, a lot of it was just trying to process all of the different feelings and emotions, and this was something that everyone was sort of doing. One thing I definitely remember is that Dwayne Harris punt return for a touchdown. Being behind the end zone where he ended up picking up the ball, there was just this feeling of like, oh shit, guy, what are you doing? If I'm being honest, it wasn't just myself. I would say like 90 to 95% of the stadium were shouting, what the F are you doing, Dwayne Harris? Why are you touching this football? Because we didn't actually remember the rule. Dwayne Harris did know what he was doing, and it turned out to be an absolute crazy play to sort of watch unfold and develop, especially behind the end zone, where it just looked like sheer lunacy to start with. Beyond that, I remember Deshaun Hamilton scoring a touchdown for the Broncos because I was starting him in a fantasy football championship. Don't ask me why I was starting him. That's a whole other thing, but yeah, it turned out to work for me on this occasion. There aren't really any other standout memories from the game itself, and it didn't really matter in the scheme of things. Like, it wasn't about the game, it was about the moment in time. It was about something far bigger than just this one game between two teams that were not very good. It was mostly about appreciating the moment, appreciating a sporting experience at the Oakland Coliseum that cannot be found anywhere else in the United States, for better or for worse. You know, I have talked about how much I love the Coliseum on this channel. There was nothing like it. And this game, at least from the football standpoint, was really what I believe to be the final go-round I would ever get to do this. The final thing I really remember about the game is when the 2-minute warning hit, because I think it just sort of a switch flipped with everyone in the stadium that like, wow, this is over. Like, this is about to be it. Everyone was just standing up, looking around. Like, that's something I remember vividly, looking around, and everyone else was just looking around. Everyone else was just sort of taking it all in, not just what was happening in the field, but just the entire panorama of the Oakland Coliseum at this very moment in time, with the Raiders in victory formation on the field about to secure a rare win that season. Things became extremely real for everyone. The realization finally actually hit. It wasn't a case of, well, the Raiders are leaving. It was, this is it. This is the final chance we're going to get to see the Raiders at the Coliseum.
Raider Nation, thank you for spending your Christmas Eve with us. The final score, the Raiders 27, the Broncos 14. Thank you for your support all season long. And especially thank you for being the best fans in all of sports. We love you all. Good night, everyone.
Well, it wasn't said specifically. The implication was clear as day. And just going back and listening to what the PA announcer said in those final seconds of the game, it really just explains the moment and all. Like, no one could say the Raiders were leaving, but it was just assumed that, yeah, goodbye forever, basically. When you compare what happened on this evening to the actual final Raiders game in Oakland against the Jacksonville Jaguars, you have two very different experiences. In 2019, the Raiders lost after leading by 13 points at halftime to a Jacksonville side that was not good. Fans were fed up by that point. They were just tired of dealing with Mark Davis. They were tired of everything. There was a lot of anger at the real last Raiders game at Oakland. Fans were very vocal in their displeasure through most of the game, and of course after it ended they started throwing trash on the field. This was a far cry though from what happened in the not last Raiders game at Oakland. As the clock expired, you heard a smattering of boos in the crowd, but it's quickly drowned out by just a roar, a very, very loud cheer. There were a couple of fools in the stands who tried throwing stuff on the field as well, but it wasn't what you would get a year later. Mostly because they also didn't have the arm strength to get their garbage or their rubbish onto the field. Anyway, the feeling of this moment in time can really best be encapsulated by the mic'd up video of Derek Carr running to the stands, and I'll just play this out for you because I think it's a beautiful thing, if I'm being honest.
Thank you.
John Gruden and a few other Raiders players also went over to the black hole, and the reaction was the same. You really can't help but feel for Raiders fans when you watch that video and when you just look at those scenes play out. Just their willingness to still embrace their team and embrace their players. It's such an amazing, powerful moment, at least for me, and I think for a lot of people in Northern California. The players, though, would eventually head back to the locker room, and this is where things started to get a little weird because no one knew what to do next. A lot of fans did not want to leave, myself included. We were just sort of looking around like, well, what happens now? The thing was, none of us really knew. We were just there waiting for nothing. I can't explain it, but it was just, it was something. With nothing forthcoming, a fan decided to take matters into his own hands by running onto the field. That person was caught, and then another person would go and do the exact same thing. For roughly 5, maybe 10 minutes, this pattern just continued. Someone would hop on the field, run around, get caught, and then another person would do the exact same thing after that person had been stopped. Where these folks were running to, I will never know. It was a surreal ending to one of the most surreal sporting events I have ever attended and will ever attend in my lifetime. I think these people just felt they needed to do something because it was the end and there just weren't any other options available. So yeah, why not hop on the field, run around, and get tackled by a security guard? It's a very Raiders thing to do, by the way. As mentioned previously, this was not the final Raiders game in Oakland. The team would desperately go crawling back in the city, needing the Coliseum for one final year, and the two sides hammered out an agreement. While I couldn't make it to the finale, I did attend a Thursday night football contest between the Chargers and Raiders in November, which was a pretty good back and forth matchup. However, the feeling on that occasion compared to what I experienced 11 months earlier was night and day. Look, I am not an Oakland Raiders fan. I am not a Raiders fan. I am a fan of going to watch football games at the Oakland Coliseum. Now I know what some of you are saying, you're not a Raiders fan, but you're wearing a Raiders jersey. Well, this is in fact an Antonio Brown Raiders jersey, which I bought ironically after he had been cut from the team. And it was not easy to find, by the way. That aside, when I look back at the final Raiders game I did actually attend in 2019 versus what I thought was going to be the last Raiders game I attended in 2018, something became very evident. The only way I can describe it is sort of like when you're in college and you have to say goodbye at the end of a study abroad program. When you go on one of these, you meet a bunch of random people, spend a significant amount of time with them over a short period, and experience a bunch of random adventures together. There will be fellow students you like, and there will be a few you absolutely despise. Regardless of that though, there can be no denying the significant impact they have on your life despite being in it for only a short amount of time. And the fact that you know you're probably going to say goodbye to these people forever, it's just weird. When you do your final goodbyes with your fellow study abroaders, you sort of move on almost immediately because you're thrust back into your regular life. Like it's just, all right, you're there. There's still a little sadness, you still miss people, but there's also a realization that like, well, it's time. Unfortunately, I ran into one of my fellow study abroad colleagues at the airport a day after we had just said our big long goodbyes. It was a very awkward experience. Not bad, mind you, but you just sort of wish it didn't happen. I mean, what do you talk about with someone after you just had a long emotional goodbye less than 24 hours previously? That was the Raiders 2019 season in Oakland in a nutshell for me. I was ready to move on and let go after that final game against the Broncos in 2018. For many of us, it was the ideal goodbye. We didn't have a chance to build up a bunch of resentment or a bunch of just negativity or anger at the Raiders. We were just there to soak it all in one last time and appreciate what we had with the team. Bumping into them again a year later, while not necessarily the worst thing in the world, it's just awkward. It wasn't the same. Honestly, the most fitting final memory of the Oakland Raiders playing in Oakland imaginable, at least for me, would have been a fan being tackled on the field, something that I would have gotten had that 2018 finale been the actual finale. Alas, that was not meant to be. I will always cherish those memories I have of the not last Raiders game in Oakland. It was one of those sporting events that really would be impossible to know about if you weren't there. If you just watched that game on Monday Night Football, you would have a totally and completely different viewpoint of what was essentially a meaningless contest between two bad teams. That does it for me. I am Cheyenne Hollis. This is the Touchback, and as always, hashtag take it out to the 25.